Inside the Circle is an interesting take on a romantic comedy. It follows a girl named Rocio who believes in marriage, but winds up falling in love with a comic book geek named Carlo, who definitely isn't ready for marriage. But as the two navigate through the ups and downs of their relationship, the question remains, will their love be enough? The film starts off by introducing the main protagonists, Rocio and Carlo. Rocio is on the phone with a colleague discussing some important documentation while Carlo is busy trying to get his hands on the latest superhero comic books. And it's pretty obvious that the two of them couldn't be any more different. But they do have a mutual friend named Justin, and it's his graduation party where this unlikely pair happen to meet. Rocio is busy discussing marriage, honeymoon destinations, and mother-in-laws with her friend Natalie. And Natalie is complaining about how her husband is a mama's boy and won't go against anything that her witch of a mother-in-law says. But since the mother-in-law is the one funding their honeymoon, she has no other option but to go with it as well. Rocio, on the other hand, has other problems. She hasn't been too lucky in the dating department. She somehow always ends up with superficial, narcissistic, misogynistic men. And if there's ever a guy who seems nice, it turns out that he's really just a liar. But mid-conversation, Rocio catches sight of a cute guy at the party and she can't help but ask about him. However, Natalie brushes her off, claiming that it must be one of Justin's geek friends. Justin and the mystery guy also catch Rocio and Natalie looking and decide to come over. Justin warns him not to spew dialogues from comic books if he wants a shot with the ladies. He introduces the guy as Carlo. They exchange greetings and Carlo actually bends over to tell Rocio that her red undies are showing because of the rip in her pants. Rocio is obviously embarrassed and Justin tries to pull Carlo away as Natalie curses him. But Carlo tries to reason that he didn't know what else to say, and since he had to say something, he just said the first thought that came to his mind. And though their first encounter was short-lived, Carlo still has the nerve to call up Rocio. He even introduces himself as the guy from Justin's party and apologizes before actually asking Rocio out on a date. But Rocio informs him that she already has a date. However, Carlo isn't one to accept defeat so easily, and he somehow pesters her into admitting that she's not too sure about the guy that she's going out with. He then goes on to ask about what she actually wants, but she hangs up on him, telling him not to meddle in her business. Still, she can't get his words out of her head. What did she want to do? What did her heart desire? Should she really give him a chance? And after a few hundred or so rounds around her room, she decides to dial up Carlo and take him up on his date offer. Carlo is surprised by her call, but she tells him that she really just wants to have a nice walk and a conversation. On the date, the two make small talk and exchange basic information about their work and life in general. Rocio shares that she's a business lawyer while Carlo is a remote-based, freelance app developer. He's working on a really cool app called Mentira, which works as a lie detector on your phone, simple and convenient. He also reveals that he's not very into the idea of dating. He feels like it is a waste of both time and money. Instead, he wants to spend time being productive and doing the things that he loves. However, this notion doesn't sit well with Rocio, and bewildered, she asks him what he would do if he never finds his soulmate and ends up alone. But he isn't bothered by that thought because he wants to spend his life doing what he loves. He likes his solitude. He knows how to enjoy his own company, and he really doesn't need any form of social validation to feel at peace. Rocio, though, isn't ready to embrace this idea just yet, and so she insists that nobody actually wants to be alone in the long run. But Carlo tells her that he is completely honest with himself, which means he doesn't need anyone else to be happy. Rocio remarks that it's a depressive worldview. But he points out that she can't point fingers because her whole idea of happiness revolves around marriage and children, which is something she has yet to achieve. And that's actually depressing since it means that she can't be happy until and unless she's married. But Rocio admits that she's still happy with how her life is at the moment, and it's apparent that the two can't agree on anything when it comes to marriage. Hence, Carlo brings up Rocio's ripped pants in an attempt to change the subject. Rocio confidently informs him that she's stapled the hole, and they both can't help but let out a chuckle. But as all good things must come to an end, the two of them part ways. And it seems that despite their differences, they both had a really good time together. But before they say their final goodbyes, Carlo asks Rocio out on another date. She laughs a little and reminds him that he doesn't like to date, but he reasons that he doesn't date just for the sake of dating, and explains that he genuinely wants to get to know her, which is why he's asking her out again. And of course, she agrees. But just when things seemed normal for the pair, Carlo shows up at Rocio's doorstep with a sewing machine and what he calls a nice gesture, telling her that she won't need to staple her pants anymore. She simply rolls her eyes at him, and then they head to Carlo's house. The walls are all plastered with portraits of different superheroes in their element. He even shows Rocio his favorite, K-On! He shares that he literally grew up with these superheroes and how they make him believe that he can accomplish anything. Rocio is quite impressed by his superhero art gallery, though she's a little puzzled by the rope he has in the middle of his room. But he quickly grabs it and shoves it out of sight. However, Rocio is in for an even bigger surprise. It turns out that Carlo cooked for her and set up a cozy little makeshift restaurant at home to impress her, and she was definitely impressed. Rocio points out that the gesture is very romantic, especially for someone who claims that he doesn't like to date. The rest of the evening is pretty much perfect, and Rocio tells Carlo all about her childhood and how her mother raised her to be an independent young woman. She also shares that she wants to eventually start her own business and break the stereotypes surrounding Latinos. Carlo praises her vision and shares that he also has his own company because he wants to be his own boss, just like her. And for once, it seems like the two might actually have something in common. Carlo tells her all about how he really appreciates the freedom he has working from home. And of course, he expresses how he doesn't believe in marriage because he's a liberal. He doesn't think you should spend your entire life with one person. He wants to be with someone else for just half of his life and spend the rest of his time by himself, in solitude. Considering how their beliefs were worlds apart, it was really a miracle how the two of them could even tolerate each other's presence. But they did, and they eventually bid goodbye after dinner with a kiss. As for wanting different things, they decide that they actually want the same things but just under different conditions. In the heat of the moment, Carlo confesses that he wants to break his rule and go on more dates, and Rocio agrees to give him a chance, in spite of how different they are. What's more, they even promise to meet again before they leave. And sure enough, Rocio dials up his number a few days later and invites him over to her place. She wants to do something nice for him in exchange for the special meal that he prepared for them, but she also wants it to be a surprise. When Carlo arrives at her place, Rocio swoops him in and gives him a sensual dance performance. He is mesmerized and taken aback at the same time, but he thoroughly enjoys the experience. And before long, the dance turns into something more intimate, with Carlo even spending the night at her place. The two of them have breakfast together, and Carlo shares how he fixed her favorite undies that he ripped. And the only thing they manage to agree on is the fact that they like spending time and having fun together. It seems that even though they're virtually different in every sense of the word, there is this undeniable attraction that just keeps pulling them toward each other. It's a sort of addiction that they just can't get enough of. And somehow they find each other spending more and more time together, just like in a real relationship. Eventually, they also come up with superhero names for each other, and it helps further deepen their love. They both are willing to break out of their comfort zones to meet the other person halfway. They are willing to learn about the other person, to indulge in their interests simply for the sake of spending more time with them. They cherish time together above all else, and that's the true essence of love. So much so, that Rocio takes Carlo to meet Natalie. And even though they didn't start off well, the two of them seem to get along just fine. As for their first meeting, Carlo reasons that any sane person would want someone to tell them if their pants were ripped, which is exactly what he tried to do, and she accepts that as well. However, Natalie brings up the topic of marriage even though Rocio specifically told her not to. Still, Rocio manages to defuse the situation, and they joke about how Natalie loves to judge everyone, which is why she was a little skeptical about letting her meet her boyfriend. So, she makes a toast to the couple, praising them for sticking together despite their very different ideologies. And even that evening ends on a lovely note. Later, Rocio confesses that she loves Carlo because he's smart, independent, and a gentleman. But the most important thing is that he's honest with her instead of lying just to make her happy. And Carlo counters with how she's smart, independent, beautiful, and how he can just get lost in her eyes. When he looks into her eyes, he feels connected to her soul, and it's a genuinely heartwarming feeling. And Justin jokes that Carlo is merely reciting a line from his favorite comic and warns Rocio not to be fooled by his plagiarism. As for Natalie, she tells Rocio that she's happy for her and that she approves of Carlo as her beau. But she also warns that she should consider how he doesn't want to get married ever, because that could be quite problematic for them moving forward. But Rocio and Carlo are nowhere near stopping. Their love is only growing. So much so, they even end up confessing their love to each other, not caring if it's too soon. And on their 6th anniversary, Carlo finally decides to introduce the concept of the circle of honesty. He reminds her of the rope he saw in his apartment on their second date, and tells her how important the idea is for him. He explains how the circle is a safe space for him to be honest with himself and others. And thus, he makes all his important decisions inside the circle. He wants to be sure before any and all major life changes, and the circle is the best way to ensure that. And he further elaborates that this allows him to truly be himself, without any regrets. So, they both take turns in the circle, asking each other questions. Carlo confesses that he loves Rocio with all his heart, and Rocio admits the same. And she even asks him to move in with her, which he obviously agrees to. But she prompts him to get inside the circle before accepting, and he obliges without another word. As the days pass and the two move in together, things start to change. Sure, initially, everything is great. The two of them spend lots of time together and indulge in each other's interests simply as an excuse to be together. Rocio goes all the way to a comic convention with him in San Diego, but Carlo can't spare the time to attend her mother's birthday party. It seems that their schedules often clash when it comes to family parties with Rocio. They also start getting irritated over little things, which naturally happens when you spend too much time with a person. And when Carlo wishes Rocio a happy 30th birthday for the third time, she gets super annoyed and accuses him of taunting her about her fertility clock. Of course, Rocio wants kids and marriage and Carlo doesn't. It wasn't too big of a deal in the start, but it's starting to take a toll on them. What's more, Carlo works from home, but no matter how hard he labors off, Rocio sometimes unknowingly takes it for granted. She expects him to run minor errands for her since he's just at home, but he obviously can't. Eventually, they have a big fight when Rocio asks him to transfer some money to her mom for her mortgage and he doesn't. Carlo reasons that he didn't have time and that her mother should set her pride aside and ask for help in time. Of course, this sets her off and eventually, it brings out everything wrong with their relationship. Carlo expresses how it feels like Rocio doesn't consider working from home working at all and she thinks that he'll always have extra time. But Rocio counters with how she would help even if she was at work. She complains that Carlo is her boyfriend and he's supposed to be there for her whenever there's an emergency. But Carlo isn't ready to back down either. He asks her who she thinks will be responsible if his work is affected because of running errands. And this time Rocio doesn't hold back either. She starts listing down all the events that he missed with her family because he was too busy. But she calls him out and tells him that he just wasn't willing to go with her. It's not that he's busy, it's just that she's not a priority anymore. She even calls him selfish and claims that he doesn't want to do anything that interferes with his life, despite the fact that she does it for him. But when they've finally let everything out of their system, they both try to calm down and diffuse the situation. Rocio emphasizes that when two people are living together, they need to make compromises to accommodate each other. And she admits that she needs to start taking his work more seriously, and they both agree and say their I love yous before getting back to work. Still, the worst is yet to come, as they're both about to find out very soon. Apparently, Carlo wants to buy a house with Rocio. Rocio is very surprised when she finds out, because although she does want to buy a house, she wants to buy it as a married couple, but she knows that Carlo would never agree to that. So, she tries to dodge the bullet by telling him that she is planning on saving up for another year or so. However, he is adamant and tries to convince her that their joint funds would be enough to buy and maintain a house. And besides, now that they had been living together for over a year, it was only logical, right? And seeing no other option, Rocio decides to just outright confront the issue. She tells Carlo that their relationship is not mature enough because they're not married, and buying a house right now would mean that they have to forsake legal protections. But Carlo is still convinced and tries to persuade her, claiming that they could co-own the house without any problems, by having the down payment and mortgage. But it isn't that simple for Rocio, who can't even digest the thought of buying a house at this stage in their relationship. It seems that despite what she said, she had this thought in the back of her mind the whole time. She thought that Carlo would eventually want to settle down and get married, but he didn't. The two of them had been very different from the start, there was no denying it. But now it seemed like they couldn't just push this issue under the carpet anymore. It was time to confront it, there was no other way out. And then the two of them decide to resort to the circle of honesty, because that's the only way for them to be completely and utterly honest with each other. It was time for a final decision, and that decision demanded 100% honesty. First, Carlo enters the circle and admits that he wants to buy a house with Rocio because it's a step forward in their relationship. They are already sharing expenses by living together, and this could be their first investment as a couple. He's fully on board with taking on the responsibility, and Rocio doesn't doubt it for a second. However, when it's her turn inside the circle, she doesn't hold back either. She confesses that she does want to buy a house with Carlo, but not if it's a business proposition. She tells him that she respects if he doesn't believe in marriage, but the only reason she would want to buy a house is to build a future for herself and her family. And so, it was a no from her. Suddenly, the air in the room gets very tense, and Carlo stares directly at Rocio as she admits that maybe love is actually not enough to keep them together. Now, it really isn't hard to guess where the story's headed, and the two of them decide to part ways, even though Carlo doesn't stop insisting until the very last moment. But Rocio has had it for too long. She wants to fully embrace her dreams, and she knows that Carlo can never give her what she wants, marriage and a family. The end of their relationship nears, and now it seems that it had always been inevitable. Their differences were not as insignificant as they had anticipated. Soon enough, the pleading escalates into fighting as the two scream insults and profanities at each other, not knowing who to blame for everything. They both feel helpless because though they don't want it, there was just no going back. Their relationship could not be saved, it was not meant to be. Both Rocio and Carlo are devastated and turn to their friends, Natalie and Justin, for advice. Natalie convinces Rocio that marriage can be overrated even though it might seem like a dream in the beginning. However, she also admits that she would never choose to not be married. She wants to stick with her decision because she genuinely doesn't regret it. And to top it off, she's pregnant. This, of course, does nothing to deter Rocio, who makes up her mind even more firmly about marriage. In fact, it makes her all the more emotional just thinking of how badly she wants a husband and a family. It had been her biggest dream to get married, and she couldn't just let it go, could she? Well, she didn't want to. And she didn't have to. There were many more fish in the sea, and she couldn't let an immature man-boy take away her dreams, just because he wasn't ready to open his heart to marriage with all its commitments. As for Carlo, he doesn't really make much progress with Justin. Justin just sarcastically throws Carlo's own advice at him as an insult. He tells him to grow up and stop being a baby. He asks him what he really wants, and Carlo is forced to take his own advice. He has a moment of realization and decides that Rocio is more important to him than his ideologies. He wants to give her everything she wants, and he wants to be the guy that she needs, even if it means changing himself, because he's finally willing to put in the effort. When Rocio comes back home, she finds the entire room decorated with scented candles and walks out to see Carlo in a circle made of candles. As soon as he spots Rocio, he gets down on one knee and confesses his unconditional love for her. He promises that their love is too strong to be broken. However, Rocio turns down his proposal because she knows that he's only doing it for her. He still doesn't want to get married, and she reminds him that they're in the circle of honesty. At this, he admits that he doesn't believe in marriage the same way that she does, but he does believe in what it stands for. He tries to insist that he's doing it for both of them. Nevertheless, Rocio is adamant and tells him that she's sorry, but she really can't get married like this. So, the two embrace and part ways for good. 2 years later, Rocio and Carlo cross paths again. Rocio is surprised to learn that Carlo still isn't seeing anyone, but masks it with a pointed remark about how it's just who he is. Carlo, on the other hand, congratulates her on her engagement when he spots her ring. And not too subtly, he asks her if she's taken her new guy inside the circle. However, she informs him that he considers it a child's game and that she's good with that. Then the both of them send well wishes the other's way and bid goodbye. Rocio's big day is finally here. She's getting married, and Natalie can't stop gushing over how beautiful she looks in her wedding gown. She keeps telling her that it's going to be a beautiful day because she's looked forward to it her whole life. But Rocio can't quite accept things as is. There's something in the back of her mind, something that she must settle once and for all before taking a new step in her life, something that can only be resolved inside the circle. So she heads into her room, locks the door, and gets inside the circle to search for answers. It doesn't take long before she's out in a coat and calmly informs Natalie that everything is well before fleeing the site. Another 2 years pass, and Rocio is sitting in her car as memories of her relationship with Carlo flash through her mind. She can't help the smile that creeps on her face, but her line of thoughts is soon interrupted by Carlo settling their son in the back seat of the car. But before driving off, Rocio takes a breath and informs Carlo that she doesn't need the ring anymore because she has everything she could ever possibly want. Carlo tells her that it was her idea to get engaged indefinitely, but she throws the ring out without a second thought. And just as she does, Carlo dives out to get it because he claims they can sell it for good money. And finally, they speed off in their car, one happy family, at last. It's a perfect ending for everyone and goes to show that just because we're different doesn't mean we have to repel each other. In the end, everyone got their happy ending no matter how different their idea of happiness was. After all, when you're inside the circle of honesty, you give yourself time to be yourself, and that's when you can uncover what you really, truly want, and most of the time, it's just to be happy.